everybody. Welcome to our talk. Thanks for coming. I just want to say I'm Tim Schafer, the president of Double Fine Productions here in San Francisco. Thank you. And I've come here today with several of our cohorts from Double Fine to talk to you about a big change in our production, the way we produce games that went over the last couple of years at Double Fine and how it some things we came up against and how we solved them. And it's called Creative Panic, How Agility Turned Terror into Triumph. It's a beautiful slide, Lee. Thank you. I want to remind everyone, if your cell phone rings during this presentation, we will stop and restart from the very beginning, even if we're like 2 minutes from the end. So please turn off your ringers. And we all want to remind you to fill out your feedback forms because they are not actually forms anymore, so that's kind of misleading, that gesture. If you get your card, your lanyard, you get your pass scanned by one of the CAs, you'll get an email asking you if you like this talk or not. I know it's hard to give feedback like that. I would like to recommend 5s. If it's a scale of 1 to 5 or 10, I haven't really seen them yet. So I just want to, in case you need to copy someone else's work, those are my suggestions for the ratings. So that would have been a good slide to show while I was doing all that welcoming talk, because we're going to miss that right now. I am here to tell you, my friends, that we are in crazy times. That these times we live in, there are a lot of big games out there, and that's a picture of me. And we at Double Fine have made big games, and we compete with big games, but the games are just getting bigger. They're getting bigger and more expensive, and they take that money and they buy the top talent, and the games get better and bigger, and it's like a snowball that keeps rolling. It's very hard to compete against for smaller studios, but there are even the really small studios that also compete in a way of being incredibly creative and taking many, many years to make their games and not paying themselves any money and living out of their basements while they do that. And those kind of studios are also very hard for a studio like Double Fine to compete with because they have a lot of flexibility with the whole lack of payroll thing. We've always been kind of an unusual studio in that we're an independent developer, but we have healthcare, somewhere right in the middle. We've been comfortable there, except for lately the phrase death of the middle has been going around, which makes us a little nervous. There aren't a lot of studios left in that middle space. And we did see a lot of pressure, like things closing in on us in a way when we were thinking about what game to make after Brutal Legend. It's getting harder and harder to sign big games like that. And there's pressures that even if you can sign them, make them maybe not what you want to sign. For example, publishers are very averse to new IP. When you're investing millions and millions of dollars, you'd rather place it on a licensed title or a sequel. It's in their defense, it makes sense, They also want to own the IP, which is something that Double Fine believes developers should own their own IP and not give them away to publishers. And yeah, you should remember to ask for that next time you're negotiating a contract. Because I think that's what leads to the best games. Developers care about their characters and worlds they're making, and it makes sense. But it's very hard to do that at these big budgets that are happening. And people giving you a lot of money to make a game also rightfully want to make it safe, make it a good return on their money. So they want to take out the risks and unknowns. But Double Fine, the things that really excite us are these risky things, these unknown, doing something that hasn't been done before. That's what makes it fun. So we saw this pressure to take out a lot of the things that made games fun if we go for these bigger games. So how has Double Fine survived this kind of pressure? We spent 10 years as a one-team studio making one game at a time. And I was always in charge of it. And it was very entrenched into our culture that that's the way we did things. But we managed to turn the battleship. This is a phrase I learned at LucasArts. Every time there was a new president or a layoff or a new president with a layoff, there would be a big meeting, and the first thing he'd say is like, "We're going to turn the battleship, everybody," which sounded really exciting. It's probably the most boring thing a battleship could do is turn around. But so we did manage to turn the battleship into a fleet of tugboats. Didn't see that coming. Or like bigger, sexier, like cigarette boats from Miami Vice, with guns on them. Just awesome boats. And we did that by using Amnesia Fortnight. Many of you know Amnesia Fortnight is a psychedelic mushroom, and we all took it, and they gave us the idea. Now, Amnesia Fortnight is something that came up when we were thinking about. I heard a story about a filmmaker in Hong Kong named Wong Kar-wai who was making Ashes of Time. It was this huge 3-year production, and his team was getting really, they're spending all this time in the desert, getting really oppressed by this huge production. And so he took his star and his cinematographer, and they went to Hong Kong, and they improvised a bunch of dialogue that later turned into Chungking Express and Fallen Angels, two completely different movies that were actually really, really some of his most famous movies. And it was a great break for his team. And I thought, that's a great idea. We should do that. It's right in the middle of Brutal. We could use a break. And it's called Amnesia because you totally forget what you're working on for 2 weeks. Forget about Brutal Legend for 2 weeks, and we'll just work on something else. It's called Fortnight. I don't know why. It's because it was 2 weeks. So, some companies have done this also, and they do it for 1 week. For some reason, I really believe 2 weeks is the right amount of time. We broke the whole company into smaller teams. Sorry, this picture makes me laugh. And we gave each, we had a 60-person team for Brutal, and we split it into 4 groups, and each of those groups had to make a game in 2 weeks. And we really wanted it to be a complete experience, which meant not just like a demo of like, here's a guy walking around, imagine he's in a great world, or imagine, but really, even if it's a small little slice of gameplay, make it complete, like a beginning, a middle, end, let us feel what this game is going to feel like that you guys are making. And it was a massive success, I think for the following reasons. It gave us a big morale boost. Everyone on the team, loved. I was walking down the hallway, and I could just feel people being excited about what they're working on in a whole new way. There was 4 new ideas going on in the company, and people were, trying new things. And everyone, it was a great on that level that everyone was really excited. And people got to try out new roles. I think this is Drew Skillman trying out the new role of God. Was that what you're? People get to try out new roles because when you have one production, one team, and you have me as a creative director, you have one lead programmer, and you have one lead artist and a designer, and there's like not a lot of room for people to move up in that unless I'm dead or get killed or fired or something. So so in order to avoid being killed, we started this whole process. So people got to, with 4 teams, we had 4 leads and 4 lead programmers, 4 lead artists, and people modelers got to try concept art because it was just like a 2-week thing. No rules. Anyway. And we actually ended up with usable game ideas. We actually ended up with these little demos that we said, wow, this is really fun. We could actually ship this or something like it. And also, as a side benefit, it also saved the company, which I love when that happens. How did that happen? Why did it save the company? Well, we did it twice. First, we did it in the middle of Brutal Legend in production. We took a break, and we did the first Amnesia Fortnight project. And we did 4 teams, and we came up with these fun prototypes, and we tucked them away. We're like, okay, we're going to come back to this when we have time. Maybe on the side, we'll do some work on these games. We'll ship them later. And then after Brutal Legend after Brutal Legend stopped, we did it again with 5 teams. And we said, okay, these are great. We can do some of these too after while we're working on Brutal Legend 2. We'll do all this. But the universe is a tricky, funny place. And the games industry is no exception. And Brutal Legend 2 was canceled, and we were like, that's interesting, because we're going to go out of business. So what can we do? What can we do to not, what's plan B of going out of business is plan A? I had nothing ready to go. I had no big idea, because I was working on Brutal Legend 2. It was supposed to be a done deal. I was concentrated on that. I had nothing to pitch. But then I thought about these 9 prototypes we had made, and there were a lot of really promising, interesting things in there. And so we picked 4 of them, and we took them on the road. And it took a little time, but we got them all signed. And we just shipped them all this year. And you can see them, Costume Quest Stacking, Iron Brigade, and Sesame Street, Once Upon a Monster. And that was amazing to have these. It was really great to be able to take a demo on the road, and it's so much easier to sign a game when you have a demo. It made signing go faster. So today we're going to talk about the process of taking these prototypes and turning them into full games. And also the specific case studies of some of the production challenges that we face, because this was a whole new way of doing production at Double Fine. It's a big change for us. And then the exact solutions that these teams came up with. And I'm going to let these guys talk. Unfortunately, Tasha, who did Costume Quest, went to Pixar, back to Pixar, where she came from. And she is not here, but we have these attractive young fellows to talk to you. That's actually the first design of the lamprey from Brutal Legend, I think, with Brad's head on it. We have Nathan Martz, the lead program of Brutal Legend and the lead of Once Upon a Monster. And we have Brad Muir from Iron Brigade. And they're going to tell these stories. And first up, we have young Mr. Lee Petty from the game Stacking. And I'm going to have him come up here and talk to you next. So here's a little peek at what stacking looks like, just to remind you. Please welcome Mr. Lee Petty.
right. Hey, everyone. Hey. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Tim, for making sure that was very anticlimactic. I'm Lee Petty. I was the art director on Brutal Legend and the project lead on stacking. And I'm going to talk to you guys a bit about how stacking started off in Amnesia Fortnight and kind of how we took it through production and some of the challenges we faced. When I got the opportunity to come up with an idea for a game for Amnesia Fortnight, one of my first inspirations was German expressionistic film. And these were films, silent films from the 1920s that were considered pretty experimental in their day. And one of the things that I always found really inspirational and interesting about these films is that they had really small budgets. And one of the ways that they compensated for that, one of the ways they made themselves interesting and stand out, is that they designed these very unique, highly stylized stage and set designs. I was also really interested at the same time in coming up with a game that explored identity in some way, maybe the changing player character identity. And so I did this little sketch at the time that was kind of fusing these two together about some crazy character that could wear living masks, and when they put these living masks on, they would the rest of the way they would interact with the world would change. But these themes are just a little too dark and weird for the sort of first game out of the gate for me, and I really wanted to do something a little more charming. And I wasn't sure where to go, and I saw my daughter playing with a stack of Russian nesting dolls, and I thought, wow, that'd be really cool. Those are they have their own style, and they're a little bit creepy, which is cool, but not too creepy, like anything German, really. So I did this little sketch, and I was like, oh, we're going to make this. And it would still let me explore themes of identity, because, what sort of worlds would these dolls live in, and what's the relationship like? What does it mean to stack inside another doll? I don't know. From there, I decided that we'd go forward with Russian dolls, and I wasn't sure, what do these dolls do? There's a lot of things they could do, and I started thinking of ideas, and one of the first ideas was, well, maybe it's a game about gentlemen's hat combat. They would fling hats at one another and resolve all their disputes that way. But it's clearly been done too much. So instead thought of something more mainstream, which was, what if they fought German industrialist nutcrackers? And these nutcrackers would arrive in the land of the Russian dolls and crush the poor little Russian dolls with their nutcracking jaws. And again, I was just started getting into a dark place. So I also remember at the time that we really only had 2 weeks to make this game. So rather than go down these roads, I decided to just focus just on the act of stacking. Let's make the mechanic an idea of stacking in another doll or with another doll the whole focus of the Amnesia Fortnight prototype. At the same time, I thought, it'd be really cool to do an adventure game. I grew up with adventure games, and I work at the same company as Mr. Tim Schafer and Ron Gilbert, two of the pioneers of the adventure game genre. I thought I could benefit from some of their knowledge, and it'd be good to get to it before senility drives it from their heads. It was really not a good assumption, but I thought that was going to work. We did the Amnesia Fortnight demo, and it worked well. Tim liked it. We pitched it. We were fortunate enough to sign the game, and then we were like, oh, well, we have to actually make this now. That's tricky. And one of the big challenge for us in stacking was that we wanted to do an original high-fidelity game, but we had a really small budget, and we had a short time frame, like 9 months, and a small team. And we wanted to do something in this downloadable space that let us do things that we otherwise couldn't do in big games. So maybe things that are a little different visually and gameplay-wise. And a lot of that comes from the personality of the game, and personality is important to us. But personality is often expressed in the small details and the presentation of the game, and that takes a lot of time. So how are we going to do that? And we knew the expectations would be high, both internally, because we had just come off Brutal Legend and spent a lot of time with so many characters and really manicuring this large world. We didn't want to give up that attention to detail. And the XBLA and PSN markets were, the games are getting more elaborate on those when we pitched these. So we needed a way of thinking about making this game, like how we're going to make this game, some sort of guideline to keep us on track. And the term we used was economy of design. And by that, I simply mean that we wanted the game to have everything it needed to feel itself, but nothing else, no fat. And we were going to start this production by starting small and growing instead of big and cut. And that sounds obvious, But actually, just about every game I've worked on is done the exact opposite. It starts with really overambitious systems design, huge lists of assets, and they inevitably are cut as the production goes on, but we didn't have that time to waste. And one of the ways we thought about it was, let's just relate everything we come up with, visually, gameplay-wise, narrative, to the core idea of just stacking. And if it doesn't directly relate to that almost physicality of stacking within the doll, then let's just not pursue it. And that doesn't mean, though, that we came up with a really tiny feature set up front and just never did anything and executed on it, and we were all happy and wore money hats. It meant that we created headroom for ourselves that during the production, because we didn't have much of a pre-production, during the production we could look for creative opportunities to expand the game and enhance it. And one way that this idea of economy of design really made sense, the obvious way, is that the characters. We basically had one character model for the entire game. And rather than make the characters interesting through lots of variation in the shape, we just challenged ourselves to do them with the textures itself. We did find, though, that characters, or the players rather, needed to have another layer of differentiation on top of the characters. Because the characters were used to solve all the puzzles in the game. They were the inventory as well as the characters. So we did that by just adding simple accessories and a lot of hats and canes and monocles and those sorts of things. But they were very quick to make. They added a lot of new personality to the game as well, and they accomplished that gameplay goal of recognizability. And the characters were really cheap to render, right? They weren't any polygons. They had very few bones, and that meant that we could put a lot of them on screen at once. So a lot of our levels, I had about 100 to 200 dolls on screen at once, moving around, doing their thing, and that let us create an actual world, which was really important to us, like we did in Brutal Legend, but in a much more economical way. The other issue that we ran into is that we love personality. We try and put personality into our games, but how do we do that animation-wise with just a few joints? And we considered adding animating textures or some sort of detailed facial animation, but I thought it'd just be really a little too creepy to have an animating face on a doll. And it was an expensive choice. So we just tried to animate just using rigid body animation, and it was really charming. It actually worked pretty well. And my takeaway is to torture your animators, because you just give them really strange requests and see what they come up with. But they're really clever, right? They can communicate ideas and emotions in ways that are really long form to communicate other ways, but they do it really well with simple motion. And as an example, I had this little dog character in the level, and he did a lot of tricks and did things like walk on his hind legs and backflip. And so I said to the animators, I would really like this dog to drag his ass across the ground on occasion, because, if you've ever had a dog, they occasionally do that, and it's really funny. And do you think you could do that? And they're like, the dog doesn't even have an ass to drag. And I was like, just give it a shot. It'll be great. And they did, and it looked a little something like this. Just a little drag in there. So yeah, animators are good. But the art production really wasn't the only way that we used economy of design. The gameplay itself centered on a series of adventure game-style puzzles that we called challenges. And one of the things that made the challenges a little different in stacking than other adventure games is that they all had multiple solutions. The player only had to do one solution, but they could choose to do many different solutions for a particular challenge and get rewarded. And although that sounds like a ton of work, and it is, it's a lot less than creating unique puzzles, right? Because we were able to use the same art assets, the area of the world, a lot of the writing, and set up some of the same dolls. So we got a pretty economical approach to replayability that way, as opposed to making so many unique challenges. And the other thing that was a nice byproduct of that is that it increased the accessibility of the game, which was a goal for us on stacking, was to make it very casual and approachable. And I think in most adventure games, there's one solution, and if players try something differently and it's logical, it just doesn't work. That's sort of a classic snafu. And in our case, since we had multiple solutions, the odds were they were going to find one of them, and that worked out well. The last thing about challenges that's worth noting is that the solutions, because they could be done in any order or not at all by the player, they had to be designed so they had no dependency on each other. And the game flow itself had no dependency on any single solution. So all the way up to, I should say alpha, but it was probably like a week before submission, we were messing with the gameplay and swapping solutions in and out based on what we saw people trying to do in play tests. And if they were trying to do something that seemed logical, we just made a new doll, coded a solution in, and then 2 days later or so, we had a whole new solution. It worked well. So we also ran into problems in that we had no budget for voice acting. But we had a lot of characters. I mean, we had a couple hundred unique characters. I think when I counted, there's about 28,000 lines of dialogue. A lot of stuff there. And so I knew we were going to have to put text on screen. But I was really uncomfortable with that because text on screen just didn't feel... I wanted it to be cohesive, thematically cohesive with the rest of the game. And then I remembered one of my early inspirations, German expressionistic film. So I brought back the idea of silent films. And we did all of our storytelling with the silent film motif and even complete with dialogue cards and everything. And that worked out pretty well, but then we ran into the fact that we had a pretty small music budget, and silent films are scored, and we couldn't afford to score all these with custom music. And our awesome audio guys licensed classical music and managed to edit that to the cutscenes as if it were custom scored music, and it worked really well. And it was really awesome to have a doll fart while Chopin was playing in the background, which was great. And ultimately, the silent film stuff added more personality for us. It gave us another motif to kind of weave in with some of the other influences. We added silent film stacking dolls. We did our crossfades in silent film style. We played a lot with those themes, the kind of overacting and all that sort of stuff. And it really just gave us another great angle on the game. So my lessons learned from this process are very straightforward but important. One is to embrace your limitations. You hear this a lot, and I think a lot of times it's more of a like, we can't possibly do this. Just embrace it, stomach it. And that's not really what I'm thinking. Like the idea of we embraced our limitations, and by embracing them, we made different creative choices than we would have otherwise made. And that went a long ways to giving the game its own sense of personality. So just work with those limitations. It's probably going to come out pretty cool. Like everyone in this industry is really clever. And then find your essence early. I think the Amnesia Fortnight process forces you in a very fatherly good way to find all of the personality up front. Don't just prototype a core mechanic in a gray box world. That's valuable, yes, but it's much more valuable to do that and try and get the artwork in there and get the music in there so you can see all those connections early on. And then the team who's making it with you has a hand in forging the vision for the game. So when you go right into production, everyone's on board with the vision because they helped make it. As opposed to reading some large document and looking at a bunch of gray box prototypes. So, I talked a little bit about finding the essence in your product early and why that's important. But next up, Mr. Nathan Martz, project lead of Once Upon a Monster, is going to talk about keeping that vision intact, even though the product itself might have to adapt to a variety of situations. Nathan.
Sesame Street, Once Upon a Monster. Join Sesame Street's Cookie Monster and Elmo in a controller-free storybook adventure filled with important life lessons, inspiring challenges, and friendly new monsters that even the biggest of kids will enjoy. Sesame Street, Once Upon a Monster.
Hey everyone, I'm Nathan Martz, and I'm the project lead of Sesame Street, Once Upon a Monster, the game you can see up there. And if you really want to understand where Once Upon a Monster started, we need to go back in time. We need to rewind all the way back to a time when housing prices could only go up and when cutting-edge internet humor was rickrolling and lolcats. And by that I mean the amazing year of 2007. So back then, 5 years ago, while the rest of the world was making irresponsible real estate investments, I was writing the dismemberment code for Brutal Legend. And it turns out this is actually not the first time I'd written dismemberment code for a video game. It was actually the second time. And as I was writing code along with Drew to dismember limbs and heads and spout blood, I kind of started to feel like I was done with that. And I was really excited to think about the next game that I worked on. As much as I loved Brutal Legend and I loved the team that I was building it with, that I wanted to do something different for my next game, that I wanted to explore a different set of emotions. But I wasn't exactly sure what that was. But fortunately, 5 years ago, I came to GDC and I saw an amazing talk by Tsutomu Kuono, who you probably better know as the creator of Loco Roco. And it was really inspiring for me to see this talk by a guy who is so clearly committed to making a fun, positive, uplifting game. It's one of my all-time favorite games. And I was like, wow, I want to make a game like that. Except I don't want to copy him. I want to do something that's my own, that's original, because that's what we're about at Double Fine. So like a lot of us do, I started sort of with my childhood heroes. I thought back to the people that influenced me creatively. Bill Watterson, for example, the creator of Calvin and Hobbes, and also Jim Henson, the creator of The Muppets. And what struck me about both of these childhood heroes was how remarkably positive they were in their work, that people remember them for the amazingly like good-natured work that they did. And I was like, that's awesome. I would love to do a game with that same level of like upbeat positivity. You know, I was also learning how to be a really terrible musician at the time, like remarkably bad. But along the way, I was reminded of how evocative music can be as a tool for creating emotion and expressing emotion. It's like there are very few things that tap into like our inner selves the way that music does. And in fact, one day my girlfriend at the time, and that's actually not a photo of her, she came up to me and she said, you know, do you ever have like a happy song, a song that like gets stuck in your head and you just feel better for listening to it? You know, and of course I was like, nah, baby, I'm all man. I don't have happy songs. But, you know, of course we all do. We all have songs that that's as a game developer, that's as macho as I get. You know, we all have songs that really move us. So when Tim came up to me later that year and he said, hey, I want to do this crazy thing called Amnesia Fortnight. Do you have any ideas? I was like, actually, I do. I've got this idea for a game where you experience the joy of creating music. In fact, there's this game that I want to make, and it's going to be an interactive musical toy. And in this toy, you're going to create your own personal happy song. But the thing is, most people, they're not musicians. They need some help. So we're going to introduce them to some friends who are musical monsters. And those musical monsters are going to help them make their own personal happy song. Tim was into the idea, and we started Amnesia Fortnight. 2 weeks later, we made a prototype. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that because we only had 2 weeks, it was going to be minimalistic environments, very simple. Music, monsters, the end. So we made that prototype, and it looked like this, an awesome little jamboree of musical monsters in a minimalist environment. And we called the game Happy Song. And we were super proud of it, but being Amnesia Fortnight, we forgot about it until 2 years later in 2009 when the end of Brutal Legend was in sight. And at that time, Tim came up to me and he said, you know, hey, let's make a small game, you know, maybe something in addition to this big game that we know we're going to do called Brutal Legend. You know, let's pitch Happy Song as that game. And I was like, that's awesome. You know, I would love to pitch the game. But if we're going to pitch it, we actually have to pitch it, you know, to the suits, right? To publishers. That we're going to have to make this game. We're going to have to make it seem at least commercial. Yeah. And the thing is, like, publishers they have reasonable reasons for wanting commercial games. And the thing is that when we looked at the Happy Song prototype, we honestly felt like it wasn't commercial. That it wasn't actually going to be a viable commercial product. In particular, we felt like the Monster Friends were really, really awesome, but the musical toy was less so. It felt really, honestly, kind of niche, you know, even for us. So that was really the essence of our production challenge, was how could we adapt the prototype, sign the game, and preserve the vision, preserve this idea of a game about joy, of a game that makes you feel happier for having played it. So we actually did 2 adaptations of that game, and the first adaptation was to pitch it, and the second adaptation was to sign it. And our first opportunity to adapt the game was with Kinect, which, as you all know, was announced with much fanfare at E3 in 2009. And when that came out, we're like, wow, this is a new platform, which is going to mean new opportunity, a hunger for new IPs. And it's obviously family-oriented. Microsoft is making a play for the Wii audience, and they're going to want wholesome, uplifting, positive, you know, pro-social entertainment for that device. There's going to be a demand maybe for new mechanics because, like, there's no buttons and it tracks your skeleton, so maybe we could innovate there. And in the end, it was a great opportunity, but the question was, how could we adapt this game about musical monsters to really work on Kinect? So the idea that we had to adapt it was to change from a game about just musical monsters and the joy of making music into a game about the joy of interacting with other people and with monsters. And the game that we're going to make would be a collection of monster mini-games all about interactions with monsters. Of course, we wanted to keep what works, in particular the Monster Friends, and a game that makes you feel happy. Those are still going to be the essence of the product. But we had to change some stuff as well. And the first thing that we wanted to change was to focus on character interaction. Where the original prototype was focused on music, we were going to focus on the connection between the characters in the world. And in order to do that, we're going to have multiple activities. We wanted to have a game where you could play dress up with the monsters, you could do a posing Simon Says game, you could dance. All of these things would be ways to interact with them. And these activities would be more physical, because on Kinect, physical is fun, so we had to de-emphasize music and emphasize the physicality. And lastly, we wanted to take advantage of the magic of Kinect, that Kinect can see you and pretend that the monsters could also see you, so that you could interact with them in a very direct, connected way. As part of that, we're like, well, if you're interacting with the monsters, how about also interacting with other people? We really love this idea of parent-child co-play, a game that parents and kids could play together. So we're going to make all of the activities two-player. We're going to have a fundamentally intergenerational focus. You can play it with a friend, you can play it with a sibling, but really we want to focus on a parent and a young child. And lastly, that means it's going to be a real-world interaction, not just a synthetic interaction with the characters on screen. As part of that, we realized that our minimalistic environment wasn't going to work. In order to contextualize these activities, we needed an actual world, a place that these activities could happen. And we were really inspired by storybook illustrators like Eric Carle and Mary Blair. We love their flat, two-dimensional sensibilities. And so we said, well, we're going to have an environment, but we're going to embrace still this idea of minimalism, of a 2D, flat, simply constructed world. And the last thing we're going to do is players are going to need instruction. They're going to need to know what to do and how to do it. So we're going to add a narrator, maybe a David Attenborough-esque character. He's going to provide exposition and instruction, but because some narrators are kind of strange-looking, he'll be disembodied and omniscient, and not actually part of the real experience. So that was actually all awesome, and we adapted our game. We made a new prototype. It looked like this, and we called it Monster Party because it was going to represent this idea of a collaborative social experience. And that was all super awesome, but then another opportunity came along, and that opportunity was in early 2010 when I read a Gama Sutra article where we heard Warner Brothers had announced a brand new partnership, and the partnership was with Sesame Street, that Warner Brothers was going to become the exclusive publisher and distributor of all things Sesame Street. So one of the cool things about that was that these were obviously a very compatible values. Sesame Street is about education and making the world a better place. We were about making games a better place. And in fact, this would be a return to our original inspiration, not just inspired by Jim Henson, but working directly with some of his creations. So as with the Kinect, it was a great opportunity for our game. But now the question was, how could we adapt that game for Sesame Street? How could we make this game into something that really felt genuinely Sesame? So the idea we had was to adapt again the game and to change it from being about the joy of interaction to the joy of helping others, of which interaction is kind of a subset. And the game is going to turn from a collection of activities into a collection of stories. Stories about monsters with problems who need your help in order to make sure that their story has a happy ending. And as before, we're going to keep what works. We're going to keep the monster friends, the interactive gameplay, the parent-child co-play, and a game that makes you feel happy. All these things are important, and they're successful, and they're going to stay. But some other things, again, have to change. So the first big change was that the storybook-inspired world became a literal storybook. We actually decided to fictionalize the world as a storybook come to life. Again, that provided a context for not just the activities, but also for the stories. And it allowed us to bridge the real world of Sesame Street with the fictional world of our game and our monsters. The second thing that we did was just took our narrator, this person who provided exposition and context, and we replaced him with Cookie Monster and Elmo, that they would now become our guides. They would have the same function in the world, but because they're physical monsters, they could be part of the game world. And because they're part of the world, they could be physical and funny and personable in a way that a disembodied narrator never could have been. Lastly, to make a Sesame product meant that we had to be educational. We didn't want to be the Tickle Me Elmo of Sesame Street video games. But we also knew that we had to be entertaining at the same time. And when you think about classic Sesame Street, you think of numeracy and literacy, ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. Well, for us, that was not going to work. It's too didactic, it's too dull, it's very age-specific. Instead, what we want to do is focus on Sesame Street's emotional curriculum, their curriculum about sharing, empathy, compassion, the identification of emotions. These things, we thought, would be really consistent with our original vision of a game about joy. And rather than just making players happy, we could actually inspire them and teach them a little bit about how to be better human beings. So we made that game, and it looks like this, and we called it Sesame Street Once Upon a Monster, and that's the game that we shipped. So throughout all this, the biggest lesson that I learned is that you really have to know your vision in order to stick to it, especially in difficult changing times. For us, that was a game about creating joy. And not only do you need to know your vision, you need to keep it simple. It needs to be one sentence or less. And it should focus on the experience of the product, not just a mechanic or a hook or an art direction or a monetization strategy, but how do people feel having played it? And once you know that, you need to tell the team and tell them often. Because if your game is going to be changing all the time, your team are the ones really grappling with that. And if they don't know, if they've lost sight of what the vision is, you'll lose sight of it too. And that little beating heart of your game is going to go away. So really, in the end, a remarkable amount of change is possible. You can see where we started and see where we ended, but ultimately only because we knew and were able to stay true to the core vision of our core idea of our vision of a game about joy. So, that's all cool. It's great to know our vision for one title, but we were making 4 games. And so how about our vision for our brand? What were we going to run into there? And to talk about that, my excellent colleague, Mr. Brad Muir, lead of Iron Brigade, is going to come up and talk to you about that.
Thank you, sir. How are we doing on time? Are we okay?
For your family, for your children. The Monovision menace has destroyed our Army, our Navy, our Air Force. Who is left to fight?
Hey, I'm Brad. So I was the project lead on Trenched, and then I was the project lead on Iron Brigade. So 2007, Amnesia Fortnight, I was in the class of 2007, Amnesia Fortnight with Nathan, and we were going to make a game, and my inspiration at the time, I was deeply involved in Brutal Legend, and I really like, as a game designer, I really like core mechanic mashup type stuff. Really like deconstructing mechanics from different games and then kind of putting them together and see what you get, and hopefully it's great. So I was looking at mech shooters a lot. This is Mech Assault. I really love that game. There's a lot of customization, and the combat's really fun, and I love the perspective, and just lots of things to love about that game. And then I was looking at tower defense games also. Like, I think that's Defense Grid, and I love Defense Grid. And there's just so many awesome decisions that you're making when you're playing a tower defense game about where you're going to put your towers and how you're going to spend your resources and where the enemies are coming from. So I really wanted to put those two things together in a game. I also wanted to make a game that focused heavily on co-op because I think Gears of War had come out recently, and I was really liking the trend in the industry to sort of shift to co-op. My brother had moved away, and that's him on my back there, and this is our primary method of keeping in touch. So I really wanted it to be a game that we could play together. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I also wanted to continue that positivity and make this a game about love. It's really important to me that much like Once Upon a Monster, we try to inject more positivity into the industry. And how better to do that than with guns and mechs and explosions. So the Amnesia Fortnight prototype, I really didn't wanted to focus on the core mechanics. So I just picked a very, very kind of off-the-shelf steampunk Britain setting for the game. So the players are tasked with defending this this giant steam factory. And they're piloting these mobile factories, and they can make defenses around the map. And there are these zombie robots that will come out at night and assault their factory. So the game looked like this. We called it Custodians of the Clock. And that is the worst name. Please never repeat that. Because a custodian, people don't think of a cool guy driving a mech. They think about other stuff. So that would have to change. But a lot of other stuff would have to change also. So our big production challenge in the game is that this is a game that's inspired by core mechanics. And the players that have played our games, that's not very Double Fine. That's not really how Tim has always traditionally come up with game ideas and made games. So it's like Tim is a top-down designer. He comes up with the fiction and the world and the all of the dressing for the game and in the setting and the fiction and all that stuff, and then works down to the core mechanics. And I'm the other way. I go bottom up. I start with the that's weird. I start with the that's not what come on. So I start with the core mechanics and then build from there, and then add a fiction and a world on top of it. So that's the real question, is that can these approaches work inside the same company? Because talking with Tim, it's important that we stand for something. We have all these creative voices that are now like being expressed, and we can't just be all over the map. Like, we want to make sure that we're still kind of in the same domain together. So is it possible for the game to be different and yet still Double Fine? So we kind of examined what our brand was to people who played our games. So from the outside looking in, we thought that players really like the stories, they really like the funny cutscenes that are in the game, and they really like the characters. So what was it really? We kind of thought about it, and the answer was that we didn't know. So we decided to, explore this and try to figure it out before we made modifications to Custodians. So the first one, the story, we decided after talking about it that it really wasn't about like a great deep story. It was more about originality, is that all these games are set in original fantasy worlds, and that that's very important to our core brand. So trying to add originality to Iron Brigade, we're taking the original 2007 setting of steampunk Britain, and it just felt a little too prepackaged. It felt like someone else's original idea. So, we really wanted to attack this and make the game a lot more original. So we held the first ever Double Fine Art Jam. So we grabbed the entire 2D concept art team for a couple of days, and this generated a really high number of ridiculous ideas. So the first one, Scott Campbell came up with this idea for these giant castle robots. So you had these chivalrous knights driving these big, huge robots, and they're super awesome. But we thought that was a little out there. Mark Hamer had an idea to use Hieronymus Bosch. I don't know if you know this guy. We used him on a lot of his work on Brutal Legend to inspire the Tainted Coil. But he had an idea to make Bosch robots that would be attacking you, and they're all super creepy and weird. And then another one that we didn't use, Bagel came up with this idea, is that there were... he thought that the heroes would be the founding fathers of the United States, and that they would pilot robots that were, giant versions of their own head. So there's the Ben Franklin one, and then the George Washington one is up there, and it has wooden teeth. And that was a little bit too out there. So we just decided that we would cherry pick the best ideas that came out of there. So I really liked Lee Petty, the handsome Lee Petty right here, came up with this idea of like makeshift World War I stuff. You see this tea-drinking guy on his tractor with a bunch of guns on it and stuff, and this big smokestack cannon that came off of a big cruise liner. And I just thought that was so awesome. I love the idea of like found technology, and it really fit the sort of like post-apocalyptic thing that I was interested in. And then Scott Campbell had this idea for these TV smoke monsters. And so these were like amorphous shapes that have these TVs in them, and you had to blast the TVs, and this was the basis for our enemies. And then Lee also had this other awesome idea that went along with his makeshift World War I stuff, and that was these big cruise liners with legs. So boats with legs, awesome. And this made it almost all the way into the shipping version of the game, where the USS McKinley that you see for the Mobile Trench Brigade, it has 4 legs, it's a giant aircraft carrier, and it's awesome. So we kind of took these 3 major elements and put them together, and we came up with the concept of the Mobile Trench. So it's like a small open-top mech with the sandbags on it and a bunch of guns. You can see the pilot in there. And then we wanted them to be fighting these TV monsters. So this was our first stab at both of these. And then through iteration, we came up with like a more blocky design for the Mobile Trench that you see in the shipping game. And then we came up with the more creepy, organic look for the monovisions that you see. Okay, so we talked about how the what people really want. Like the first core thing is originality. So looking at the funny cutscenes, we decided that the second thing was really personality for the game. Our games have like tons of personality, and it's not necessarily about the funny cutscenes. It's just about like that they're dripping with personality. So to attack this problem, I decided that I really wanted to involve the whole team. The company's awesome, and Tim hires awesome people. I think so. And your team has been soaking in your company culture for a really long time, and that they literally are your company culture. So if we can take ideas from them and inject them directly into the game's just going to have a lot more personality. It's going to feel like a game that comes out of our studio. So this is Raz, and he is Raz. He's a concept artist on the game. And he had this great idea for using these men's magazine covers from the 40s and 50s. And this was a really awesome inspiration for the game. I love the over-the-top manly men and the machismo. It's like very satirical to take this and sort of make fun of it. Also, a lot of these covers, there's a whole subset of them that I love where it's men fighting little tiny animals. I don't know. It's very, very strange. But we we used these and sort of made, we made our own versions of them. And this kind of formed the aesthetic backbone of the whole game, using these men's magazine covers. The topography is awesome, and they're just awesome. I love them. So this is Chris Journey, and he's the lead programmer, and he's also in the front row right there. He was the lead programmer on Trench, Iron Brigade, and he had this great idea. Actually, I didn't think it was a great idea at first. He had this idea that in between the missions, you're running your Trench Marine around on the deck of the ship, and that you could use the right analog trigger to salute. And I was like, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. I hate you, and I would fire you if I could. But I asked him, I was like, how long will it take? And he's like, it'll take 2 days and 1 day of an animator. And I was like, all right, fine, you can try it. Fine. And he went and did it, and we play tested it, and everybody just totally loved it. And they ate it up, and it was awesome. And I have since been swayed, and our buddies over at Giant Bomb turned it into this big, weird meme thing. And it really helped us grow the community. It was just very, it was something unique and original and gave the game a lot of personality. This is Jeff Solis. He is the lead artist of Iron Brigade. And so I had this giant spreadsheet with all these weapons that I wanted to have in the game. And I felt like it was way too big. It was 150 plus or something stupid like that. And I just gave it to him, and I was like, hey, will you want to just make a bunch of these guns? And, I thought he was going to come back and be like, oh, I can give you half. But no, he was like, yeah, I'll do that. I'll just do all those. And I was like, sweet. And he just came up with all these crazy guns on his own. There was not a lot of time for concept art or anything. He was just, cranking these out, and they all have unique reload animations, and they're just awesome. They gave the game a ton of personality. Okay, so we talked about that's the second core thing for the Double Fine brand is personality. So the third one are the really memorable characters. And, we thought about it, and it turns out that, yeah, it's really memorable characters. You guys totally nailed that one. So one of the problems was that it's really difficult to inject character into a mech game. I'm not picking on Mech Assault here. I love that game. But, the mech is so big, and the human that's piloting it, that would be a mech warrior, is so tiny. You can't even see him, and it's really hard to actually get a character really, really in there. So our solution was the open top mechs, the mobile trenches. So if we peel the top off of it and make it a lot smaller, the human's going to be a lot larger, and he'll be a lot more visible. So we can do things like here, he's drinking a whole bottle of whiskey after completing a mission, or lighting a cigar with a pistol. A lot of these manly things from the men's magazines can really shine when the mech's a lot smaller. Another place where we added more character into the game was the commander of the Mobile Trench Brigade. He wasn't really a major gameplay piece at all. He was just a dude on the ship that gives you missions. So, we thought about having maybe one different character for each of the theaters that you go through, and, it was kind of boring. But then Tim and Peter Chan came up with this idea that maybe the commander can be confined to this iron lung, which is a really creepy contraption. And Peter's first take on it was a little weird. He had this upright iron lung that we were not super into that. But, just going with a more traditional iron lung that had these little mechanical arms on it was really cool, and created a really memorable character that you're interacting with all the time on the ship. And it really helped us hit that. So, the Double Fine brand, we really feel like it's about originality, personality, and memorable characters. But through this process, we also learned that it's about another thing, and that's the element of surprise. And Iron Brigade, as a game, was kind of already doing this. Nobody really expected us to make a shooter. But, by making it and by going through this exercise, we just really feel that we want our fans to expect the unexpected. The next game that we announce will just be something that nobody saw coming, and that's really important to us. So the lessons that we learned from going through this process, you really want to identify your brand as soon as you can, and it really just helps drive your decision making. Also, you shouldn't be beholden to what other people think your brand is about. It's really up to you to define it, to really put a stake in the ground and tell people what it is. And then also, you should always be on the lookout for opportunities to apply your brand's fundamentals to your game without disrupting its core. And now we're going to check out a video of the transformation of these three games from their Amnesia Fortnight versions into their shipping versions.
Hello again. So just a couple of quick takeaways. First takeaway is these guys rock. These guys have a big hand for Lee and Nathan and Brad, and also Tasha. Tasha as well. It was really important to this whole process that I was able to let these guys run their own projects and not have to, they had full autonomy and I could trust them to get these things done, which was really important to it. I think this going into multiple teams like this allowed Double Fine to become really agile, which led to our survival. I mean, I think if we were married to one plan, one type of game, one platform, one device, we would be out of business by now. We now have multiple teams so we can try things, and if they don't work out, we can move into another direction, and it's really made us a lot healthier as a company. Having multiple teams allows the team, like I mentioned before, to grow. Everybody can move up into leadership roles, and we can try someone out on a 2-week prototype without risking the whole company on them, and then if they work out, and give them a bigger project later on. And as a company, now that we can really diversify. We might not have wanted to try a licensed product like Sesame Street, Once Upon a Monster, if it was going to define our entire company. Now we're doing licensed properties, or even a Kinect game, or we're doing a mobile game or something like that, because people would think, well, that's what they're doing now. They're a mobile game company all of a sudden. But now we can have multiple teams. We can try each of these things. We could try mobile. We could try a free-to-play game. We could try to get money from the internet on Kickstarter. We can do anything we want because we have multiple teams, and we're really just we're sending a recon team out to investigate that opportunity for us. And I think the biggest takeaway for me was that is about core principles, not just like how important it is to stick to your core principles when you are doing a major transition, but actually you can use your core principles to make that transition happen. And for me, it was finding out that the core principle of the company, the number one thing for me was creativity. And when we had a big blow to our financial stability by losing a multi-million-dollar project like Brutal Legend 2, and we were worried about going out of business, we weren't bailed out by some big publisher or an angel investor. We didn't have a big Kickstarter back then to give us millions of dollars. We weren't saved by anyone except for we looked at the team's creativity, and it was really the creativity of the team that saved our whole company. And that was, for me, just really a great moment for our company to know that we could save ourselves with this thing that we've been working on this whole time and wanted to identify ourselves with. So that's the summary of our talk, and I want to thank you all for coming and remind you to fill out your feedback forms, and if we have any time now, we can take some questions. So thanks for coming. How much time do we have? So we have, when do we have to get out of here? Yeah, 3? What? We have 9 minutes? Oh, we're good. Oh, I know we're good. I'm just saying. Okay. So there are these microphones right over here and here, and I see people are running to the doors where they think the microphones are, but the microphones are actually up here, you guys. So I want to get really close. First, you over there. Hello there.
Hi. I had a question. So you had multiple teams for your Amnesia Fortnight, but you also have multiple people in your company. How did you decide which ideas to run with? Like, you had your 4 teams, but there has to be an initial selection project or process of these are the ideas we're going to run at.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everyone had an idea, but how do you make that final selection?
Yeah. So how did we pick which projects to make Amnesia Fortnight? We had many talented people in the company. And there was a combination. There's one, there was like a solitary thing with just my, visibility on the whole company. There's people I've had my eye on for a long time for disciplinary reasons like Lee, or for, But there's people who you can kind of tell like who's got promise, and you think I want to give that person a test and see if they can, what they would do if given a little a chance, given a shot. And then also sometimes when there's a lot of especially this, we have done it a 3rd time now since this, and there were so many. I just invited submissions from the whole company, and there were so many that I had to get a kind of a little group together of some of the previous leads and senior people in the company to like look at all these submissions and really talk it through, which one we thought fit the company strategy, tested the right people, and did the right thing. So there's a combination of some hand-picking, but also some just really talking through with the team of like which ones worked out best for us long-term. So thanks for the question. Yes?
Thank you.
Did it upset your publisher at all to take people away from the project Brutal Legend and have so many people working for 2 weeks on all these different projects?
So here's the interesting thing. Don't always tell your publisher everything. I'm trying to figure out the timing on this because both times when we were doing Amnesia Fortnight, we had the luxury of not having a publisher at that moment, and we had a dark period in the middle of Brutal Legend where we were publisher free, which was terrifying, And also after Brutal Legend, the contract was over and we had some freedom. But we, once we and that's something you don't have to worry about the first time when you're a single company going to multiple projects. Once you have multiple projects, there are multiple revenue streams. Everything's not coming. You can't. No one funder of your company can prove they paid for your Amnesia Fortnight, which is really important because, anyway, it's part of your overhead of your company, and it is something that is totally valid to spend your money on because you're investing in the future. But basically, you lie and say your milestone is going to be 2 weeks later than it really is. Okay. So, next question.
Why 2 weeks, and would you find it to be effective to do more or less than 2 weeks?
I didn't bring my slide rule, which is so I can prove it's mathematically perfect amount of time to spend on this. What it is, you have to trust me. I picked 2 weeks actually because of that story about Wong Kar-wai. I heard it was 2 weeks, and I don't know. 2 weeks is this magical amount of time where you feel like you could do anything. Like when you're like, when's that task going to be done? Oh, I think it's going to be done in about 2 weeks because that sounds like infinity, basically. So 2 weeks equals infinity. And I really think I think it's important to do 2 instead of 1. I think 1 week is just enough time to get your team in sync and moving. I think 2 weeks really to do it is what helped us get these things that were ready to be pitched, I think. So thank you. Yes.
I was just wondering, where did you start in terms of tech with each of these games?
Oh, that was a really important thing. Where did we start in terms of tech? It would have been really hard to do this if we didn't have the Brutal Legend engine. We had the Brutal Legend engine working, and we had tools, a pipeline, and the team knew how to use it. And so we could just start day one on the gameplay and the art direction. We didn't have to worry about making an engine anytime. But even if you didn't have an engine, there are out-of-the-box engines you could use. When you say anything, you could grab one of the things that's out there and use that. I wouldn't start and write a whole new engine from scratch in 2 weeks. It would make you spend a lot of time on things that were not right.
Yeah, we'd actually designed the Brutal Legend engine to have really a thoughtful separation between game-specific code and game-independent code. And that's what actually allowed us to basically every Amnesia Fortnight project has always started with a little kernel that we call a seed. And it's just like the most basic game where it boots, it runs, there's a dude, there's controller input, and then have fun. And I think that some of the architectural decisions we made very early in Brutal Legend have allowed us to build a code base that can support everything from Once Upon a Monster to stacking to Trenched or Iron Brigade to Happy Action Theater, Costume Quest. It's a lot of that is just that top level kind of switching in and out.
All right. Oh, we have one more question there.
So do you think having these predefined divisions of teams really helped have everyone on those teams have creative input? Or do you think it could have been just as good to have these initial ideas and then allocate resources? This project needs a lot more artists, or this project is much more technically demanding, even though the teams might not have started out all being like one big family.
Are you saying how we split up the team, how we chose the teams for the, how do we split them up?
You could have done it differently and it would have been more or less creative.
The way we split up the teams to do the Amnesia Fortnight is that we picked the leaders of the teams and we let them pitch their games to the whole company. And then everybody got to put a stack rank list of which ones they wanted to work on. And then every team lead got to put a stack rank list of who they wanted on a team. And then we made an Excel document that actually calculated points for each thing and came up with this robot-generated list, which was totally not just me filling in slots when no one was looking. But, it was it really was we tried to do a balance of who wanted to work on what and who needed who for their project. And then the way we would pull some people from here to there, and that's how we picked it for the team to be a good balance between. We just tried to make sure that each team had what it needed. Some of the times they had to scramble. I remember Brad didn't have was it an animator, or you didn't have a concept artist?
Didn't have concept artist.
Didn't have a concept artist, but I think Jeff or Randy, some of the guys in your team got a chance to draw some good concept art.
So that was cool. Just
that's
many hats.
Part of the reason that the original Happy Song prototype had no environment was I knew I needed a lot of animators. And so I was like, how about no environments? And then other people can take the environment artists, and I'll take lots of animators. And that worked out well.
And there was some things that were unfair about that, but it kind of seems kind of draconian, but I think actually learn how to fight for resources is part of learning how to run a project. Sounds dark, isn't it? But it's knowing what your project needs and knowing how to get it on your project. That's part of making a game. So that's part of the trial by fire. Is there time for one more? That's a wave. Does that mean go away, or does that mean? Oh, we're done. Okay, we have to go away. So I don't have time to remind you to back our Kickstarter project or that stacking's available on PC. So I won't say that. So bye. Thank you.